Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're ready for this. I know that I am. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. Got a great show for you today. The one and only Doc Askins, a.k.a. Deadpool, a.k.a. Ben, a.k.a. son, brother, husband, father, veteran, psychotherapist, and friend. All of his lies are true. Everybody should know that by now. And he writes his books with tears in his eyes for you and for you only, ladies and gentlemen. The one and only Ben Doc Askins, author, father, speaker of truth, an incredible individual. Ben, thank you for being here today, my friend. How are you?
My pleasure, man. I'm glad to be back. The mask isn't muffling my voice, is it?
A tiny bit, but who cares, man? As long as you're not sweating under there too much, you know what I mean?
No, I'm good to hook.
Nice, man. I love it, brother. Thanks for being here today. What is going on in the world, man? You got the book out, you got the audio book out, you've been doing some speaking gigs. What's going on, man?
Yeah. I opened my own private psychiatry practice in Kentucky. I bought a farm as like a surprise gift for my wife for our anniversary. What else? Yeah. I'm working on a bunch of like research projects with a couple companies. I can't really talk about it beyond that, but some pretty cool stuff. Yeah, cool stuff. All of it. Yeah. Like you watched the Super Bowl over the weekend. Deadpool 3's coming out in July. So now like I have a reason to live for another couple months. Yeah. I'm just excited to be alive, man. Excited to talk to you. You're a good dude. I'm a good dude. We'll have a good conversation.
Of course, man. So when the potential clients come into the psychiatric office, are you wearing that mask?
It hasn't happened yet, but at some point it'll make sense. Like it'll become a thing if I keep doing it long enough, right? And then they'll expect it. It'll be like, why am I talking to the regular guy when I could be talking to Deadpool? You just got to ease people into it over time, right?
Of course. Yeah, it's like anything. Pretty soon people will want to come to talk to the Deadpool guy.
Yeah, it's like any other psyop. Eventually you just adjust to whatever they keep stuffing down your throat over and over again. This is delicious. I'll take more advertising, please.
Man. I love it's so true. Like advertising is, what blows my mind is that perhaps some of the most intelligent minds in art design are currently in the world of propaganda. Maybe it's always been that way.
Yeah, I think it's probably inescapable, right? Like it's all about winning friends and influencing people, like Dale Carnegie said.
Games people play, right?
Yeah. I mean, what else are you going to do while you're stuck in this meat suit?
Well, you know what? Maybe we should talk about the idea of influence for a little bit. Like you have to be one of the most well-read people I've spoken to on the podcast. And
Thank you.
It's true. And I think that people who read The Anti-Hero's Journey, there's so much in there. People that are watching this right now, you should check out Ben's book, The Anti-Hero's Journey. It's just chock full of so much cool stuff. It'll make you laugh. You'll sit down the book like 5 times and be like, what is this guy talking about? And you'll look it up and you start laughing. It's amazing. But the idea of influence, man, like let's riff on that for a little bit.
Yeah. What do you want to know about being influential, right?
Yeah.
I think my friend David Connell over at psychedelics.com, they're like naming me some kind of like influencer or something in the psychedelic sphere. I don't even know what that means, man. I'm on like the cover of a magazine in India. I don't even know how that happened. Like where do we live? What time is it whenever like a guy like me just like sticks his neck out there and shows up on a magazine? How do you become an influencer? What is an influencer in the first place, right? Like people just listen to you because you have a camera. Everybody has a camera now. Everybody has a personal brand now. Like it's just so much white noise at this point. I'm just one more example of like what white noise can turn into, I guess. I don't even know how to make sense of it. Like why would you be influenced in the first place by anyone? What was the first influence in your life, George?
Probably your parents, I would say, like on some level, right?
Yeah. And did your parents like tell you the truth about everything from the start, or did they tell you about like the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and a whole bunch of other bullshit. Yeah. So like,
Of course.
why do you believe anybody? Why do you accept influence from anybody after having the sorts of experiences that we all have as children of just being lied to over
Yep.
and over and over and over and over again? Sometimes they're fun lies, sometimes they're harmful lies, but like, why don't you just think for yourself or not at all?
Yeah. If you don't think for yourself, that there's a lots of people paid lots of money to do the thinking for you.
Yeah, you can outsource it to whoever you want, right? You could outsource it to me at whatever my hourly rate is. You can outsource it to that supercomputer in your pocket for whatever
Yep.
amount you paid for that. Like, there's always somebody who's ready to like set you up for an automated subscription for whatever it is that you think will distract you from your existential dread.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me, and I'm hopeful that this happens to everybody, is that they find themselves on the doorstep of despair because they realize everything they've been told is a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like what is it, nihilism, right? Like it's all meaningless. It's the Big Lebowski in the parking
Right.
lot where they come
Right.
walking out and the nihilists are threatening them, and Donnie says to Walter, "Are these guys gonna hurt us, Walter?" "No, Donnie, these men are cowards."
It's so true.
Right? The Big
Yeah.
Lebowski, Keys to Life. Yeah.
Man, the dude.
You know, I've got this like you're one of like the 3.5 people that have read my book so far. So like figuring out where that fits into the overall scheme of like what do we believe about who
Yeah.
we are in the first place? Like what are we doing here? It's a whole bunch of like stories about stories about stories that go all the way back. But like how do you make sense of it? Where are you at now? Like I just listened to your podcast with our mutual friend Clint Kiles over at the Christian Psychedelic podcast.
Love that
Man,
guy.
I was really grateful for that conversation. If anybody hasn't listened to that, go on over there and take a listen to some of George's story there, man. I really appreciated you opening up about a whole bunch of your stuff that's going on there. But like, what are you doing on a Christian psychedelic podcast, man? What's the deal there?
I really like Clint Kiles, and I think Clint Kiles and I have some shared goals and some shared sacrifices, as do all my brothers and sisters out there. And I think that going on and speaking about the things that happen in your life, while irrelevant, and I don't really want to go out and like, hey, look at me, I'm a big baby sometimes, or I fought this battle and I lost. Like, it's not about that, but it's about being proud of living a life where, you fail sometimes. You go out there and you start peeling back the onion. And the more I understand, the more I do that, the more relationships I make, the more I realize that it's my life experience. It is the, let me think for the right word for a moment. It is the lived experience that makes a life worth living. And there's no real good and there's no real bad. There's only the lived experience and that which you draw from it. And that hopefully allows you to have the courage to take the next step forward and be the best version of yourself. And that doesn't mean society's best version of yourself. That doesn't mean, the external validation that the people seek, that I seek, that everybody seeks. Like, that is what is hindering you. This idea of external validation is the thing that's causing you to be stuck. And so that's why I'm on other people's podcasts. That's why I'm on Clint's podcast. That's why I'm opening up out there, is that, look, I got to a point in my life where, I can't do it anymore. Like, the lies that I've told myself, the lies that I've been surrounded by have not only hurt me, but they started hurting my family. And I can't have that anymore, man. So it's like, I'm just this open book now, and I'm coming out and I'm doing what I love. And I think it's contagious, man. So thanks for asking, and thanks for the kind words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool that you came on his podcast there. I mean, I've been a Christian virtually my whole life, but I'm still, I'm like 43 and still trying to figure out some of that stuff, right? Like I got a good grade in Hebrew. I got a good grade in Greek in seminary or whatever. And I'm still trying to figure out, what do I believe as a grown-up? How do I raise my kids? What stories do I tell them? We told them a whole bunch of stories that we inherited that I I don't know how true they are, right? And that's the struggle, is this idea of like truth in the first place, right? That was a
Yeah.
question, not to quote the bad guy or whatever, but that was Pontius Pilate's question, right? Like, what is truth? Whenever he was trying to decide whether they should crucify Jesus or not. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure, man. Like, it's stranger and harder and weirder than it ever used to be to try to figure out what actually is true. Like, it's almost like you got to cancel everything and go all the way down to nothing, to absolute zero, and try to like reconstruct from there what exactly you do and don't want to believe about anything, man. But that's hard to pull off while you got a 9 to 5 and you got kids to feed and you got responsibilities and all these other illusions that just demand your attention all of the time, right? Like, how do we approach truth in this like post-truth era where all the people in charge are lying to us and we know it, but we got to vote
Yeah.
for somebody. So, November's coming. What are we going to do in November? Like, just going to show up and flip a coin like every other year, or vote for a third party that's not going to make it, or I don't know what to do, man. I got to like teach my kids, and I'm just struggling against the mystery behind all the other mysteries like everybody else, right?
It's so true. Yeah, please.
Hang on a second. I'm gonna do
The man behind the mask.
just a second here. Like, it's just it's getting hot, man.
If you have another
This
mask under
is
there,
actually really fun. Like, you can do this. Like, oh,
whoa, that is pretty epic, man. It puts the lotion in the basket.
it's like I'm gonna tell the truth. It's like I gotta take off all these masks about
The
who I
metaphors are
am
funny.
in the first place. There's that identity question behind all these
Yes.
other questions or whatever, right?
It's
So
so apt.
let me like, this is like my thing now, right? It's like I'm the zero with 1,000 faces. Let me hang on a second here, Scooby Doo. This other one off here, and now and we just lost all of the people who are watching live. They're like, oh God, put that mask back on. God damn, I didn't realize that was what that guy looked like underneath. They're expecting Ryan Reynolds, and they got stuck with this. It looked like an avocado had sex with an even uglier avocado, and not like, it was like angry. They had to work some stuff out in therapy or whatever, right? Like, now we're stuck with this. Yeah. Let me I've got this like idea about telling you a story, and I don't know
love it.
if you're cool with that, but that's kind of my byline now, is this psychedelic science war storyteller. So like, what I want to tell you maybe is like, I have this idea of what an origin story might be for the entire universe, and I'm just going to throw it out there and see what comes back or whatever, right? Because like you said, I've read a significant amount of ink at this point about these sorts of philosophy questions and physics questions and all of that sort of stuff, right? I think everybody agrees before there was something, there was nothing. I don't think that that's controversial. It's just nonsense. You can't really talk about nothing. We talk about the Big Bang, or we talk about a creation story or a creation myth, or the two options seem to be either the material universe has existed infinitely, which creates mathematical problems that we aren't able to solve. So we suggest, maybe not an infinite material universe, so it had to have a beginning. That's where we go with. But what happened before the beginning? And like, your teacher will get mad at you if you ask that question, because that's nonsense. There can't be a before the beginning. There's just the beginning of the beginning, right? But that that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. So here's what I think. Okay, at this point, provisionally, about the beginning of the universe, is that before there was let there be light, before there was creation, in whatever creation myth you have, there was nothing. And that nothing decided to deceive itself into being something. Whatever that looks like, nothing said, I am. And when nothing said, I am, it became something. And maybe that was the first God, or the God behind all other gods, or the creation. And when I'm saying nothing, what I'm talking about is this mystery that's incomprehensible and beyond our ability to get at, right? But if nothing is going to become something, it's going to have to be deceiving itself to some degree. It kind of tells itself a lie at the very outset. And then if you accept the lie, and this is kind of, me playing around like chapter 0 from my book, right? The liar. If the first thing in the world is the creation of all things required this lie, I think that makes sense of a bunch of like what we know about what's available in mythology and history. Because the oldest, Sumerian cuneiform codices and all of the oldest, like most ancient Joseph Campbell, Hero with 1,000 Faces, suggest that there was the most ancient god was a trickster god. You go as far back as you possibly can, and there's a trickster, right? And we think of the trickster in like a Carl Jungian tradition as this like Loki figure, who is always trying to get away with something, always trying to trick humankind into making a mistake. Or it's Enki from ancient Sumeria that like lied to the Adamu human character and tricked him into refusing eternal life whenever he got to heaven to talk to the high god by telling him, don't eat any of the stuff or don't drink any of the stuff because that's what's going to kill you, but it's actually what was going to make him live forever, right? But I think actually the first one was deceiving himself, like talking nothing into being something in the first place. Is this what I call the poetic effect of sin rather than the noetic effect of sin? There's a sin effect on the way that we think. So going all the way back as far as possible, everything got created by self-deception in the first place, and we've just been deceiving ourselves to one degree or another ever since. And the idea is that there's a first axiom. You have to accept something at the outset. Like our parents tell us, hey, you need to believe in this particular religious tradition if you're going to make sense out of the world. Or if you're going to be a good person, you need to act in the following ways. You don't tell lies, you don't do all of these sorts of things, right? And if you accept whatever the first lie is that somebody tells you, you get to play by those rules forever, right? Like there are two theories of truth in philosophy, in Western philosophy. There's the correspondence theory and the coherence theory. And the correspondence theory just says something's true if it matches everything that's going on outside you. That cup has half a cup of water in it, and there's a line drawn on it that says that's half a cup, and either you got close or you didn't, and either you get an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F on the test based on how close your eyes measure up with what is reality outside of it, right? And a coherence theory of truth is, do your thoughts match up with the logical rules that are associated with whether you can retain truth from one proposition to another, right? The classical laws of logic, modus ponens. One man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens, and all of those sorts of things. Are we following the rules about the way that you think on the inside, right? But all of that again assumes that you're willing to play the game in the first place, that you're willing to accept the first axiom. And kind of where I'm at this point is I just want to remind people as much as possible that the first axiom is a lie. That you can play by the rules, or you can accept, or you can go looking for a different axiom. And I just want to remind people about that over and over and over again. It's like, okay, do you like the game that you're playing? Do you feel like you understand it and you know what the rules are and you're winning and you're making friends and you're influencing people and you're enjoying it? Great. Continue to play by that game, but understand that it's a game. If you're not, if you're suffering, if you're struggling, if you hate your life, if you don't want to live, if you don't want to go on anymore, it's okay to go all the way back and take a look at whether you want to believe that first lie or not. And it's okay to look for a different one to believe, but you're not going to escape the fact that you're going to have to buy one of them in the first place if you want to play the game at all. Does that make sense? Or have I started to ramble more than usual?
No, it's beautiful. It's it's a lot of work to do that, because you have to peel back all the lies that you've told yourself or been told through the game to get to the first one. And sometimes that first one is tricky to find, and it's buried under there. Is it the ceramic model of the universe, or is it your dad saying that he loved you? You know what I mean? Like it's tricky to find it, man. It's heavy to lift that one up.
Yeah. What are you going to build on? It's
Yeah.
It's all what's solid. What can you trust? What can you rely on? Is it inside you? Is it outside you? Is it a relationship with yourself or a relationship with someone else? Whatever it is, you get to kind of decide and discover at the same time. Is there a comment from my friend Christian Gray here? I see some comments popping up.
Yes. Let's check it out. Shout out, Christian. Inky is a trickster god. In most of the other stories, he is shown in the same way. In the marriage of Ereshkigal and Nergal, for example, he arranges events so that Nergal, god of war, will be held in the underworld for 6 months of the year, thus preventing warfare and strife during that time.
Yeah, that's a good insight. I like Enki. He's a good dude. I think if I was gonna pick a lie to believe, I might go back to the Enki myth, the Enki and Enlil myth. And I think that's the same people as like the ancient astronaut theory of where we're like a slave planet, the Zechariah Sitchin, like Martians came and what are they called? The Anunnaki. The Anunnaki. Yeah, Enki was one of the Anunnaki with the big brains and it's been alive for a long time. You want to hear a story about those guys?
Yeah, man. What you got? Let's hear it.
So let me tell you the backstory to writing lies, and more lies. Christian says exactly lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yep.
And ancient Sumerian myths, right? I am you're much more of a psychonaut than I am. You're much more psychedelically experienced in personal practice, right? I read all the papers and I have like a license to practice some of this stuff, but I've been very careful about personal practice because of being a husband, being a dad, having businesses, being a soldier, a whole bunch of things where like there's some, liability associated with all the lies that I've believed and continue to believe about who I am. Right. But I had an experience of a non-ordinary state of consciousness, on my 42nd birthday, and I'm going to tell you 42. About that one. Yeah. What's exactly? Yeah, what's 42? The secrets of the life universe and everything, right? Yeah, exactly. You get it. See, you get it, George. Even if nobody else does, I've always got you.
I'm here for you.
You've become one of my favorite illusions too, George. Okay, yeah.
I love it.
42nd birthday, 2 weeks after having that non-ordinary state of consciousness, I got a download that is the anti-hero's journey, the Zero with 1,000 Faces. For 2 weeks in a row, I just had to write that book, which is intended to be a psychedelic book, not a book about psychedelics, but a book that is a psychedelic or whatever, right? But I don't know, maybe you or maybe Christian could help explain to me what exactly the hell was going on. If I give you kind of my journey journal, would that be something you'd be interested in hearing?
I would love it, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so 42nd birthday, doing some holotropic breath work real hard and get into this non-ordinary state of consciousness. And I felt like I died every death that anyone has ever died for 13 billion years, whatever it took, from like a single celled organism all the way up to me sitting on a couch in 2023, all of the death, all of the badness, all of the dark side of things, like over and over and over again. I don't know what that is. Like, I've read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and what the bardo is supposed to be like sounds similar, or like understanding of the underworld or hell or some of those sorts of places in a whole bunch of different religious traditions. It felt like I died and gone to hell would be the way to kind of oversimplify it. And like reincarnating over and over again just to be killed over and over again. It's like I got to experience the last 30 seconds of everyone's life for the last however many billion years we've been around. Yeah. And I thought, like, okay, I guess I died and went to hell. Now I live here. And I have some like genuine real memories that feel as real as childhood memories of being burned alive and being disemboweled and being drowned and just death over and over again. What does that say about me, that's what my psyche decided to prepare for me on the other side of some kind of significant experience, right? But it was whenever I accepted that okay, I guess I live here now. I guess I died and went to hell. I guess I might as well make the most of it. That I started to crack jokes in that whatever other space that was. It was like, all right, like I'd be getting held down by some demon, just this hideous thing, like this is the bad trip of all bad trips. Like I've compared notes with plenty of people and they're like, yeah, your trip sounds way shittier than any trip I've ever heard or whatever. Right. I'm getting held down by a bunch of demons and they're slowly cutting my head off with like a dull toothbrush, and I'm just cracking jokes now. I'm like, oh, didn't we do this like 3 billion years ago? This is real fucking original, guys. Like if you run out of ideas for tormenting me, and then, like they get all the way through my head and I die. And then I get recycled again and somebody come and stab me in the back. I'd be like, oh, you backstabbers. Or like, and just shit jokes, just dad jokes, but they were making me laugh or whatever. Right. Which was where I kind of connected with the Deadpool character from Marvel Comics. Right. Because essentially he feels it all and has like the regenerating properties that Wolverine has, right? Where like he can heal significantly. Like in the movies, he gets pulled in half and grows new tiny baby legs or whatever, right? And but he doesn't have an adamantium skeleton. He just has a regular human skeleton, just has to suffer through all of this stuff. And his way of getting through it is talking to himself and cracking jokes. It's this humor that gets him through all of the amount of pain that it defines his existence. In the comics, like he wants to die over and over again. He tries to find ways to die by suicide and just can't pull it off, right? He has like a love affair with Lady Death. Like that's his dream girl is death, and he just can't make it happen no matter how hard he tries. And that was what it felt like for me, right? But it was when I connected with humor, when I started to laugh, when I started to just say, okay, I guess I live here now, and I connected to joy. That was when I escaped. I got out of hell. And I think that was something that I needed to have sort of cemented in for me, is that, joy is the way that I have gotten out of suffering. It's the way that I've endured deployments and being separated from my family. It's the way I've endured, having toxic leadership in the military that you just have to obey these orders that could potentially get you hurt or killed or whatever, or like just having a mixed bag as far as childhood goes. Right. But it was always just finding joy, hunting the good stuff, having a laugh. That was my way out of suffering. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, man, it makes total sense. I think that humor is like the last, like gallows humor or any kind of humor. It's like when you come to that situation on the precipice, you can either laugh or you can cry. I'd rather laugh.
Right.
You make yourself laugh, right? That's all you got, man. And people hate it when you Briar Rabbit, like all these tricksters is like, just say the joke.
Me in that briar patch. Go ahead. Yeah.
It makes perfect sense, man.
Yep. That's our baby. That's where I was stuck. So as soon as I started to laugh about it, a few deaths in a row, I was just cracking jokes, and then I escaped and I got out of hell and I was back on Earth. But I was on Earth and I was a 90-year-old man dying of bright red blood per rectum. I was bleeding out of the ass. And this is where like my medical background shows up some, right? I was riding shotgun in a car and I'm a 90-year-old man and I'm just bleeding everywhere. And I'm suffering, and this is the end. And I was like, oh, well, this isn't as bad. Like, this isn't a demon burning me to death. Like, this is, like I had a long life, and I'm just riding in a car to my death or whatever. It felt like a step down from the intensity of what was going on before. And then I looked at the driver's seat, and I saw my 50-year-old son. And if I made eye contact with my 50-year-old son, I became my 50-year-old son. And now I'm driving the car. And I'm like, oh, God, my dad's going to die. Don't let him die. I got to get him to the specialist. I got to get him to the guy. I got to find the hero. I got to find the hero with 1,000 faces in this medical system, right? And everybody's looking for that answer outside of themselves. Where can I find somebody who's going to save me from death and dying and suffering and pain and all of the problems? I can't do it myself. I got to go find somebody who's been to school for 50 years to figure out how to heal whatever this particular issue is, right? And some of that, like as a physician assistant, you get the opportunity in school, in my clinical clerkship, you rotate through all of the specialties. Like I get to shadow the general surgeon and the dermatologist and the ER physician and the trauma surgeon and the psychiatrist and every one of the medical specialties imaginable. Urology was fun. They got a great sense of humor to be working in that particular specialty on a regular basis, right? But you get to follow all of these specialists around and learn from them. And that was what it felt like, was I was going around at the end of life for a whole bunch of different people. And I'm driving to the hospital with my dad who's dying, and I get in there and I make eye contact with the specialist, who's the surgeon that's going to, try to stop the bleeding in my dad, right? And as soon as I make eye contact with him, I become him. And guess what I discovered as soon as I became the hero?
That you're not the hero.
That there is no hero. It's just another dude. Like the guy is suffering himself of a bleeding ulcer. Like he's doing scopes on people all day long, and he's got a bleeding ulcer himself from the stress of being the guy that's supposed to be scoping everybody else out, right?
Right.
And he's got all this crushing student loan debt from going to medical school, and he's trying to build a practice, and he's not home enough, and his wife and his kids don't know him, and they're mad at him for never being there. And when he is home, he's exhausted and he's useless, and and he looks at this 90-year-old dude and says, like, why is this guy even still alive? Like, oh my God, he's so old. Fine, I'll save another one of these just so that the insurance company will get off of my neck. And sure enough, he goes in, does whatever surgery is needed to repair whatever the problem is, to buy this guy another week or whatever it might be, right? And then bill his ancestors, his children's children, for what it's going to cost to fix it, and they'll be in debt forever for another week with great grandpa, and then goes back to his office and just drinks a shot of whiskey and wishes he was dead too. Like it was just misery on misery on misery, right? And I know that's not like every person's experience, right? I don't want to go super duper dark here or whatever, right? But
it's beautiful.
I've recycled, and then I'd get done with that and I'd recycle through to okay, so now we've got ortho, right? Like somebody's got a bone tumor, and I'm the guy oh God, my leg, and I'm holding my leg, and I'm gonna die of this bone cancer. And then I'd make eye contact with a family member who's we got to find the guy who's going to save us. We got to find that savior. Then make eye contact with the surgeon, and the surgeon was just another person over and over again. We're all just people. Like you can have 1,000,000 degrees. You can be excellent at your job. You can be a very good person, but you're still just going to be a person. You're like this hero concept needed to just get put to bed for me. And then I wound up writing this kind of book about what I think is a way to try to outgrow what are children's stories about needing a hero to come and save you, and just being whoever you actually are, rather than trying to put on 1,000 different faces of being, the hero that someone else needs. Just figure out who you really are. That's what we need more than anything else. This is what it is to be on the anti-hero's journey, is to be fully human, with all the flaws associated with it, with all of the problems associated with it, to not have to just go out into the world with this bullshit spandex suit and this mask and pretend to be something that you're not in order to get by. We need to make room in our consciousness collectively for it to be okay to be whatever each one of us is, and to make the kinds of communities around people that are compassionate and caring and supportive all the way through life, acknowledging that it will end at a certain point, and that it's okay to carry people through that in ways that I'm still trying to figure out how to do that right myself, right? Like figure out how to raise my kids, like I was saying earlier, and trying to figure out how to love my wife and to be a good neighbor, and to just, care for my patients and my colleagues and all of those sorts of things from a place where I'm just being reasonable with the expectations that I set of myself and everybody else. Does that make sense?
Man, I think you're speaking to the collective delusions of our society, man. It's just everybody feels like they're not enough, and you're surrounded by this pornographic message of, look at me, I have this, look at this thing over here, you suck, you don't have that. And it's just this never-ending fire hose of bullshit that's aimed at people, and it makes them feel so alienated, man.
Feel inadequate, right?
Man, yes.
I'm a member of the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition. Like, we're doing a bunch of work behind the scenes advocating for getting access to psychedelic assisted therapy for everybody, really,
Yeah.
but for veterans in particular is kind of like the doorbuster, right? Like, here's some people we've sent into harm's way as a society, and they have suffered the consequences of that. And here's some medicine that science suggests should be able to help them heal in a way that is uh, leaps and bounds, orders of magnitude greater than anything that we have currently, right? And what's
Right.
it going to take? Why is this taking so long? What do we got to do? And one of the co-founders is General Martin Steele. He's a retired 3-star general, 2-tour platoon leader in Vietnam in the Marine Corps, worked in the intelligence community thereafter for a very long time. If there are any heroes left, or if I was gonna believe in one, he might be one, right? Like,
Nice.
he's just a good man in so many ways, right? And through some weird psychedelic synchronicity, I wound up picking him up from the airport one time before I had become a member of the coalition, and giving him a ride. And what we wound up talking about was teenage suicide in the car. Like, I had just been to visit Fort Campbell with my family, where I'd been stationed before. And my daughter had reconnected with a friend of hers, and my wife was talking to the girl's mom, and she said, like, this is 8th grade, and there's 3 girls in my daughter's old school there that had died by suicide during last year's school year. Like, 13-year-old girls, 14-year-old girls. And it just, it crushed me. It broke my heart. Like, why? You've been here for the blink of an eye, but you're done. You're done with this planet. You're done with who you are. You're done with whatever mask it is that got laid on you from the outset, right? What
Yep.
what is it behind that, right? And that was what, General Steele and I were just kind of trying to make sense
Yeah.
of, from his vantage point and all the years of experience that he has, from my vantage point as a clinician, trying to understand it. And I don't know, man. That's the answer behind a bunch of it, is like, I wish that I knew. And I would, like, there's things we can point to in research. Oh, online bullying's a new thing, but bullying's always been there. The identity thing, that's what I come back to over and over again, is we don't know who we are, and we don't know where we're coming from, and then we feel disconnected, isolated, and alone, and that feels like it's not worth continuing, right? Like, the survival instinct, the instinct to survive, is one of the most basic biological drives we have, right? Like, if I held somebody down by the throat, they would try to fight tooth and nail to live. Under normal conditions, it's that fight flight response. We've all got it hardwired into us. And how much do you have to suffer for how long to override that yourself, to decide, I don't want to be here anymore? That level of suffering is unique. It's an unconventional headspace to get locked into, especially that young. What are we supposed to do about that? How do we address some of those sorts of things? And he and I got to connecting about trying to make sense of that, and just sharing a bunch of stories, right? And I feel like maybe that is the biggest corrective, right? Like, a bunch of my life right now is spent on this psychedelic science stuff, on advocacy, on education, on medical practice. And yes, psychedelics are interesting molecules that open up the world. But what I think is going to actually save us all is friendship. I think that friendship is the thing, is the key, is the cornerstone, is what we're all actually looking for, and what could actually save us and create communities that are healing in and of themselves, whether there's any mushrooms present or not, whether there's any plant medicines present or not. I think that's what we need more than anything, is that level of connection among people. I think friendship is the answer. I think that's what we're all looking for. So I think if we were just better friends to each other, that would go as far or further. And then if we were being friendly, we would probably legalize psychedelics as fast as possible, right?
Yeah.
So I got recycled over and over and over again through all these different medical specialties, right? To the point where I just did, like, I was sick of being the sick person, and sick of being the family member, and sick of being the guy, until I realized there was no guy. There is no hero. No one's coming. It's up to us. We got to figure this stuff out together. And that was whenever I got out of Earth and got thrown into this super weird, space like where I don't know if you call it heaven. I don't know if you call it they call them entities or whatever. Like you just see aliens. I don't like what's your experience been of some of that stuff, seeing weird things on the other side of a breathwork session or a mushroom. You've got way more experience than this than me. What is all that?
I think it's you being honest with yourself for the first time.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what I think it is. Like, it's the first time having the courage to see beyond the bullshit.
Hmm.
And and whether it's psychedelics, to me, the idea of someone being broken and then being helped through that situation with psychedelics, like, I think you have to be broken. Like, man, my niece died of a fentanyl overdose. It makes me want to fucking cry when you start talking about that kind of stuff. Like, I have goosebumps. Like, I hate it. And I hate it. And you go down this rabbit hole of like, okay, it seems to me that it's not a mistake. Like, the conditions in which we're living are being thrust upon us. Now, the question is, what do you do with that? Is that a catalyst for change and everyone becoming the best version of themselves? Or is that a way to refresh the tree of liberty with blood? I don't know that I don't know that answer. My idea is much like you. Like, there's no tearing down this empire. It's the only way to do that is to become the very best version of yourselves. And every teenager that's died, everybody in your family that's tried to commit suicide, like, you should learn from that. This profound unhappiness is something that you can fix in yourself. And when you do it, it becomes contagious. The same way illness is contagious, so is wellness contagious. Now, psychedelics, when you see the alien, you're seeing a version of what is possible. You're seeing an original idea. You're seeing something you haven't seen before. And I think that that's what psychedelics, whether it's through the other side of breath work, whether it's through psychedelics, whether it's a profound mushroom trip where you understand that you're part of this planet, that is the beginning of healing. That is the beginning to expand your senses in a way in which you've never done before. And that's what makes moving forward possible. All of a sudden, when you're sitting outside and you're like, is it even worth it? I'm going to do it because I got a kid. I'm going to do it because I love my wife. And that's the only reason I'm going to keep moving forward. But then all of a sudden, through this psychedelic journey, you go, you know what? Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe believing all these lies, maybe believing that I'm not enough is the problem, And then, like, that to me is the alien, is seeing yourself for the first time in a way you haven't since you were 4. Like, that's alien because you can't even describe it. It's been gone so long, but that's what I think these entities are. They're versions of a possible truth that could be there, and we talk about truth. Maybe seeing these things in a psychedelic journey is beginning to live your own truth. Maybe that's the real truth, is your truth. What's meaningful to you? That's my definition of what these things are on the other side. They are shards of what can be. What do you think?
I like I like it a lot, right? Like, there's just I get overwhelmed by the amount of options or alternatives for trying to understand some of this sorts of stuff. And maybe that's because of like reading too much when I was younger or whatever, right? Like, do you interpret it as a dream in like a psychodynamic way? There's there's like what are the channeled works, like I don't know, like
Sure.
the Law of One, or are you familiar with Edgar Cayce?
Of course, the Akashic Records.
Yeah, so like I don't know what that stuff is, man, but that was like Hopkinsville, Kentucky. That's like down the road from, like, I've been to Hoptown a whole bunch. I got friends who are on the police force there, that deployed to Iraq with me and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like that's my backyard, is this Edgar Cayce character, right? Who is very, very fundamentalist Christian, and then would go into these trances and say all of this super woo-woo, new agey sounding sort of stuff, and then would also like say, hey, mix up some like nutmeg and 3 rice kernels and feed it to this kid who's got this horrible fever, and the fever would break or whatever, right? Like this like
Right.
medical intuitive thing that nobody could make sense of, but that they like built a whole hospital around back in the 19th century just so that people could come see this dude and try to like let him heal them in almost like a touch the hem of his garment Jesus kind of way that,
Yeah.
like, what are you supposed to do to make sense of any of those sorts of things, right? Go ahead.
On some level, I think answers are revealed to you. They're not learned. And choose your faith, whether it's the Christian tradition and or it's the Hebrew tradition, or it's some of the Eastern traditions. The answers are all around us, man, and they're revealed to you. And on some level, science has taken us so far away. I'm not using science as a pejorative or anyway, but in some ways, we've gotten to this point where we can only take for truth what's measurable. Well, we don't have the language, we don't have the tools to measure everything. We're very narrow in the world that we participate in, the world we see, and we look at the way the world has become specialized. We're getting even more narrow. Look back at Edgar Cayce. Look back at some of the ways in which indigenous tribes talk to plants and figure out how they heal people. Like, that is innate wisdom. That's the world talking to us through us. Like, the world is full of answers if you just sit down and listen. But sometimes maybe we need to ingest a little bit of nature to speak that language. Like, why wouldn't you need that? What's wrong with these things as being exogenous neurotransmitters? It seems to me like if you're part of this planet and we're part of a body, maybe this thing that we take over here helps us see things more clearly. Like, maybe we're sick, maybe nature has the answers. And I think the answers are revealed to you, and you don't need to be, you don't need to be Deepak Chopra, or you don't need to be Elon Musk. You just need to be Ben or George and sit down quietly and start thinking about things, man.
Yeah.
Like, the answers are there.
Yeah. I had, I sat on my front porch in a rocking chair and drank coffee this morning, and I thought about nothing. And it's like my favorite thing in the world is to think about nothing. Not nothingness, not Sartre, not Kierkegaard, none of the philosopher, nothing, bullshit, nothing, like literally just nothing. And it was just blissful, right? So here, I'll tell you the third chapter of this experience, and I'll tell you that I don't have a fucking clue what to do with this, man, or whatever, right? So because like I wound up in this, it was like you ever see, so like in the Matrix movies, he meets the architect, right? And there's all these TV screens with different versions of Neo that found his happy way into the architect or whatever over and over and over again. And there's all these different outcomes where he just fails and he's going to get recycled again, and then the architect's like, this time's a little bit different or whatever, right? it had a little bit of that feel to it, like you've peeked behind the curtain or whatever, right? I walked into this room, and I was in the presence of what I would call ancient ones. And immediately I knew that was what they were, that they have been around a shit ton longer than the blink of an eye that I've been here, right? It had the feeling of like being a little kid when you walked in on your parents at like a parent-teacher meeting, and you were supposed to be in the car, like you and your brother were fighting in the car, and I'm telling, and you go inside and you go in, and parents and the teachers all turn to look at you like, what are you doing in here? You're not supposed to be here, Junior. Like, I was interrupting some cosmically important things that were going on. At the same time, they were kind of impressed, like, oh, you had to have been through some shit to get to this room, man. Like, it was like they instantly knew that I had died 13 billion years worth of deaths. And then I'd gone through this weird medical specialty vision of, what the hero is or isn't, right? And they were like, okay, well, if you went through all that just to get here, you must have a question, right? You must have set some intentions. You must have wanted to like know what's the secret of the universe? Like, if it's turtles all the way down, I want to talk to the turtle at the bottom. What's the turtle at the bottom got to say about all of this, right? And I couldn't talk, man. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't remember who I was, couldn't remember where I came from, couldn't remember what was going on, because I was just in awe of whatever these three things were, right? And somehow I knew that their names were Enki, Enlil, and Anu. I don't know what that means, man. Like, I didn't know what those entities were. I had to look that up afterwards, right? Like, what does that mean? That I knew the names of these super weird space alien looking things that were super scary, right? And that I couldn't even talk to, and were gigantic, and I was tiny, and whatever. So they were like, how about this? We'll show you every universe that could possibly exist where you married someone other than your wife. And if I looked at one of the like Neo TV screens, I'd slide down into this other universe. I looked at one of them and I was like a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, and I had like a harem of 1,000 women. And I was like, oh, that's not my scene. This is not my thing. You know, it was like an Eyes Wide Shut party. It was horrible. I was like, I don't know. This isn't my thing. Like I'm hardwired for monogamy, man. That's not my scene. Like the
Love it.
whatever. And I just slid back out of that universe and was like, I'm not looking at any more TV screens. They're all super gross and weird. And they were like, all right, like, you don't want to pick, you don't want to whatever. There was a girl that I had a crush on during like my developmentally formative years, right? And they were like, hey, we could send you to that like dream girl universe, or you could, you know, stay married to the girl you've been married to all of this time. And it was like the whole room started to shake, and it was like you know, they wanted me to give them an answer, and I just couldn't talk. And then from like the deepest part of me that I could access, I knew who I wanted to be with. I knew that my wife was my girl, that she always has been, that like, you know, like, I don't know if reincarnation is real or not, but I'm going to go try and find her in every life I got left, you know? And, like, yeah, she's the key to a whole bunch of questions that I haven't even been smart enough to ask yet or whatever. But when I do, I know that she'll have them. And I said my wife's name, and it was like everything came together. Right. And they were like, yeah, exactly. You know, which is funny, right? Like, you go through all of this just to go right back to where you were in the first place, and like appreciate it for the first time that there's this person here who has endured being with you for all these years, all these deployments, all these kids, raising these kids by herself, a whole bunch, just struggling and enduring and having your back and caring and looking out for you in ways that you couldn't even have imagined. Right. Yep. It was like, yeah, we're real proud of you. That was the right choice. It felt like everything else was a temptation, right? It felt like maybe, you know, like if I'd have picked one of those other universes, they'd have straight up killed me or something, or something like that. You know, like, you fucked up. You got to start all over again. Right. You're not who we thought you were, or whatever. You got to go back to being a fetus and learn all these lessons again, or whatever. Yeah. Right? But they were like real proud, and they were like, all right, go spend some time with her. Right. And I just spent the rest of my birthday with my wife, you know, enjoying who she is and loving her. And it was like, I don't feel like I need some kind of other state of consciousness anymore or whatever. I just need to be here now with you and these kids for as long as I get the opportunity to do that. Yep. And there was this little itty bitty blink of an eye between, like, there's this truism or whatever, you know, this aphorism in integration therapy where they talk about, if you get the message, hang up the phone, is what they say. Like, don't just keep going back, you know, don't keep calling the same number after you've been given the information that you need. Right. And it was like, all right, hang up the phone and go be with your wife. And in between hearing that and going to be with her, I feel like I touched that nothing on the back end of before the first lie ever got told, whatever that mystery is, whatever, you know, people can call it God, people can call it you know, source, you can call it the creator, whatever that particular energy is. And it was like, I got to see all the way through that, like, whatever, you know, story I'm telling myself, whatever the Anunnaki are that you just met, or whatever ancient alien theory there is of how Earth got, you know, colonized in the first place or whatever, it's all just stories. It's all an illusion. It's all bullshit. Be here now. And being here now meant, you know, be a husband, be a dad, be who you actually are. Right. And I wrote this, you know, book about like enlightenment and what all of that means. And that's, you know, like, I'm saying, like, I think I might be more enlightened than any of the people who ever claimed to be enlightened along the way. Also, I'm not enlightened at all. Try to make sense out of that. Right. Like, you know, that's just another paradox that I think we get to the joy of trying to live in the tension of, but we'll never, you know, fully wrap our heads around. So my way of being in the world is just trying to love my wife and my kids, and imagining that there's really not any line of difference between them and me and everybody else that I interact with. And I felt like the message that I got from that nothing, from that zero behind all the 1,000 faces, was that it's all okay in the end. that was the message that I got from, the Virgin Mary in the chapter in the book about the Virgin Mary, was that there's this deep okayness at the end of everything, whether that's the heat death of the universe or that's my own death in particular, or if there's even a difference, I'll never know. But that I can live out of today knowing that things are okay in the end. And that's the message that I want to bring to everybody out there, is that you can be deeply okay too.
I love it, man. I think it speaks to the idea of giving people the courage to do that. Like, how many, I know, and I can only speak to I know in my life, like I wanted so much because I wanted my family to have more, because I equated having more with being happy. But the more I tried to get more, the more unhappy I got. And like the further I got away from my family, like, okay, if I could just make a little bit more money, then I could go on more vacations and me and my wife's relationship would be better. Or if I could just, get this other thing, and I could pay for the tuition, and my car alarm wouldn't be going off all the time because I can't afford a new one when I'm driving, and people wouldn't be laughing at me, and like, but what I came to realize, and I think this speaks to this idea of being here now, is that's the bullshit. Those are the lies you tell yourself. And when you realize that, it gives you the courage to be like, maybe money's not the problem. Maybe the problem is not honoring the relationship that I'm in right now. And when you have your wife and your kid there, and it doesn't take a whole lot to look around and see how many marriages fail. It doesn't take a lot to look around and see how many parents can't be there for their kids. And to know that you can, when you're in a position where you have your family intact, you got your health and your safety and your family's intact, and you got everything. You got everything right there. And if you can get to that point, you can go, okay, let me just pause for a minute and be like, you know what? Maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe I don't need to chase those dreams. And whose dreams are those anyway? Is this a dream that like I didn't even talk to my wife about? Like,
whose face is this?
The 1,000 faces, man. Like, just peel them off.
Peel them
Yeah.
off.
Do you
Underneath
think that
all the false selves isn't a true self? It's just
just
self.
another, yeah. Well, okay, but this kind of speaks to you talk about Grand Priest and true paradoxes a little bit, and you just talked a little about paradoxes. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit. Like, is that why you enjoy reading some of him and wanted to talk to him so much, is because he represents this idea of true paradoxes?
Yeah, at least Grand Priest's work is, so you had him on your podcast. I had him on my podcast. He's a really interesting cat.
Dude, I felt like an alien. Right? Yeah. I was like, dude, I don't know if I can talk
really
to this guy.
Enjoy his work.
Yes.
If you get a chance to, if you like philosophy, you
yes.
haven't read Grand Priest, pick up his books. But he has this way of still persisting in being logical while acknowledging that we can't establish logic in the first place in the way in which it was classically presented since, like ancient times, right? There's the classical laws, like the basic laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction. And this guy there's been people who've raised this throughout, generation after generation. Somebody said, hey, I think this logic stuff is bullshit. And everybody's like, boo, stone him. We get this, kill the heretic, cut that guy's head off. Like he saw behind the curtain, and he's, like the anti-hero has not fared well in the history of thought, ideas, and religion. Right. But he's somebody who's been given the opportunity in his capacity as a professor to say, like, hey, I think we should at least acknowledge that there are problems that we can't solve in the background of logic. We can still function, and we can still use logic in ways that are appropriate to different contexts. But the idea that this is some sort of, infallible, irrefutable system that was handed down to us from God or something like that is yet another, initial lie that you can decide whether you want to accept or not. And he proposes these what are called paraconsistent logics that are actually used in developing the technology that you and I are using for talking to each other right now from halfway across the planet, right? So without denying some of the classical stuff around logic, you can actually do some really cool things in technology and in the world, right? And there's a whole bunch of these, there's a bunch of examples of the way that technology is going to take off, and like our kids are going to be whatever, transhuman, or whatever you want to call it. There's a bunch of ways that they're figuring out that the universe is made of light and that we're all just light beings, and that we're reflected through DNA as a hologram, or whatever, whatever the like actual thing winds up being that we discover is true about what we thought was mere matter and motion is actually a lot more complicated than that, right? But living in the tension of paradox is what I kind of harp on a bit in the book over and over again, is this idea of living out of that mystery between, the law that says that something it has to be either A or B, not A and B, and then it can actually be both and neither, and we can still make sense out of life and function in the world. So that what I wind up doing whenever I'm searching for what's true is simultaneously holding everything in tension, so that I'm open to the possibility that people are actually talking to aliens whenever they're on some psychedelic journey or channeling or whatever. I'm also incredibly skeptical that any of that has happened at all ever, and that we might be completely deceiving ourselves. And I hold both of those things in tension all of the time. And that's what I think is the way forward, so that if something is true, you don't simply dismiss it because it doesn't match your ideology, but you also don't just fall for anything that gets thrown at you that seems plausible along the way. So you have to hold, like these extremes of truth and falsehood in tension. And I think that that's a meaningful way of staying what's been called, anti-fragile in the way that you hold your belief systems about whatever it is, about it, anything from your, career plans and financial retirement planning to like your, way of parenting, or your scheduling your life, and whether you go to church on Sunday or mosque on Friday or whatever it might be, or temple on Saturday, or however you spend your time. Just understand that there's a tension there that has to be embodied rather than articulated. Over and over again, I'll talk, I'll suggest like stay zero or going zero or be zero or whatever. And like all that means at some level is that it's time to stop talking and start doing. It's time, like the words are tools for certain purposes, but they're not everything, that there's a lot more and a lot less going on than we're capable of talking about. And at a certain point, it's time to like spit on your hands and, grow some plants and take care of some animals and hug your loved ones and say goodnight and take a rest and just do it all again tomorrow. That's what I mean, I guess, by holding these paradoxes in tension is, and it's a lot of reading and a lot of writing and a lot of talking to say, like, start a garden, do yoga, drink coffee on the porch in a rocking chair, like if my dreams would come true, I want to be this, eventually I want to be the psychedelic Wendell Berry. Like I'd like to just sit on a farm and write some books and be with my kids and take care of some animals and grow some plants and tell some stories. Some of them as true as I can make them. Some of them absolute bullshit. But at least they'll be good stories. My commander in Iraq always used to say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Don't be like, give us the report, but make sure it's a good story the way that you do it or whatever, right? Like, yeah, and don't lie to me so much that like somebody gets hurt. Right? Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, the Grand Priest is fascinating, and the idea of the paradox, I think you can see it everywhere. You can see it on one side being science and one side being faith. We could bump up against it in the psychedelic experience where you find something that's ineffable, I think it speaks to the idea of the limiting power of language. Like language is one of our most amazing tools, but yet it's so limited that we can't really describe meaningful things to each other.
Yeah. It's a rusty hook, man. Like we want it to be this real specific, like, especially like the analytic philosophers are the worst. Like Grand Priest is an analytic philosopher. It's all like these words, if we can turn words into math, then, it would be perfect or whatever. And
Right.
sure enough, math has its own set of problems too that, you know, I kind of run through punk rock style in the book too, or whatever, right? But I think once you get to where you're open to that, like you stay open in a very closed way, or you're, you know, accepting of everybody's hypothesis about anything, but also skeptical of everything. There's that like I was describing it to a friend of mine the other day, is like I feel like I don't give a fuck about anything at all anymore, and the way that I don't give a fuck about anything at all is by giving all the fucks about all the things all of the time. Like it's just this tension all the time of like, yes, I care about absolutely every living thing that I interact with all the time. Also, it's all gonna die. Jesus Christ, I don't give a fuck. I just need a nap, or what, you know, like. And it's not like I'm vacillating back and forth between those things. Sometimes, on a, you know, like I'm not great at figuring this stuff out, but for the most part, it's just trying to live out of this tension in between of like, what matters, you know, what can I reach, what can I actually, to come back to your influence question, what am I actually influencing, right? Like,
Right.
I'm on all the social media now. Ugh, and it is a cesspool, right? Like, it's amazing to me how many people will click like, how many people will comment, but how many people don't actually read. Like, you can look at the stats and they're not actually reading that article. Like, you know, you get 90 comments and it's 45 people click the link or whatever, right? Like, what's going on here? How many people actually buy the book versus how many people say like, cool cover, bro, on Facebook or whatever, right? Like, the disparity there makes me laugh all of the time, right? But I get, you know, like my the only reason that I stay on social media at this point is the direct messages that people send me, which again is a mixed bag, right? There's like all these confusing honeypot thirst trap sorts of things. Like, does this
Totally.
actually work on anybody? Like, I couldn't believe it happens as often as it does on LinkedIn, where it's like, oh,
Right.
hi, I looked at your profile and my boss thinks that you and I would be very compatible. And it's, you know, like a pretty young girl's picture or whatever. Like, does anybody actually answer these? Does this work on anyone? Right? There's those, and then there's trolls. There's just like obviously like mean people who hurt you. Like, what happened to you that you want to be this awful in public in front of everybody or whatever, right? And then there's you know, people who need help, and there's enough people who reach out to me that need help or that want answers that I stay on social media just for that. Like, there's people who I'm doing therapy via, like, not real therapy, right? Like, I'm not practicing medicine or something that way, but it's like, hey, let's find you a therapist in your local area. Like, you really need to talk to somebody, and I'm going to stay on this messenger thing until you make an appointment with somebody, right? That's the influence that matters to me to some extent. I don't care if anybody buys the book and reads the book, man. Like, it's just a, you know, it's just a coaster. It's just, you could prop up a table with it if you don't like it, right? But like, that's the kind of influence that's worth my time from time to time, right? So long as it doesn't take time away from the people that are right in front of me. And that's that tough balance to strike for all of us, right? Where do I put the phone? I just want to throw it into a lake at this point. Yeah. But here, can I tell you another weird story?
Yeah, please, man. Absolutely.
Ever since having that experience, I've tried to live out of this tension, right? This paradoxical tension. Like I've said, my mission in life is to embody all the paradoxes in a way that overcomes fear with love. And then I feel like the universe ever since then has repeatedly tried to tempt me into believing that I'm a hero. And I am convinced that it's like heroes don't exist. And then like, they're like, oh yeah, do you want to prove that that's not the case or whatever, right? I did the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver in June. And I shared a story on a couple other podcasts about like doing some suicide intervention therapy in my book booth. Like, I had a booth where I was repping the book, and I wound up like, there was like 4 or 5 people in a row one day that I was talking into wanting to live instead of rather die after they were reading the anti-suicide chapter in my book, right? I got all done with that week out there, 5 days or whatever it was. And I had planned on staying an extra day to have some me time, right? Oh yeah. Like I worked hard. I deserve a massage and to sleep in one day. And I suck at that stuff anyway, man. It's honestly a waste. Like, if somebody sent me like a gift card for a massage, I'd give it to somebody else. Cause like I get all done getting a massage and I was like, that was a waste of time. Like, that was nice things are wasted on me. honestly. So I just missed my family. Like, I got all done. I had a flight out a full day later, and I was like, I'm going to move my flight up. I'm going to check out of the hotel a day early. I'm just going to go home. I want to be with my kids, right? I've had to be away from home a lot because of the military. And at this stage in my life, like, it has to really be worth it for me to go someplace else or whatever. Like, it has to seem like a real opportunity to do some good in the world, or to pay a lot of the bills that I have, or whatever.
Right.
And I was like, I just want to go home. So I got up, changed all the plans, got an Uber to the airport. And I guess the entire city of Denver, they had to announce an unofficial evacuation or something, because like everybody in the universe was on the interstate at that moment, and they were all going to the airport. I don't know if everybody at Psych Science had already planned on leaving then, or like there were 12 or 16,000 people there or something, right? So like if everybody was going to the airport that day, I should have waited till the next day to go, right? Like, and that's something that, you know, classically would have made me anxious or angry. Like, oh, here I am stuck in traffic. I'm looking at the time, moved my flight up so that I could get out of here early. It does not seem like I'm going to make it to the airport itself in time to catch that flight, right? And the very nice Nigerian immigrant that was driving the Uber, you know, like, we're striking up a conversation, and he's very certain that he knows a shortcut. And I was like, oh man, I am fucked. I'm watching the GPS, and every turn he takes, like, the time moves up instead of down or whatever, right? Like, you know, he's a nice guy, but we are lost. We are officially lost out in like the sticks or whatever. We finally get to the airport, and I get checked in, and the airport's under construction. There's like a round the outside way that they want everybody to go through security. And I was like, this is insane. There's no way that I'm making this flight, right? I get to like security to check in there, and they're like, oh, there's a discrepancy between your ID and your ticket. You're going to have to go back to the counter and fix this. So I went through the line one time just to be told to go back. I was like, oh man, this is insane. There's no way that I'm going to make it. I go back, get it fixed, get through security again. And I'm not getting mad. For like the first time in my whole life, I'm like, okay, you know, there's something happening here that I don't understand, was the thing that I kept saying over and over again, and was just really peaceful about it. It was like, well, if I miss the flight, I missed the flight. Like, it's not the end of the world. Everything's okay. There's something going on here, right? Finally get through security, finally get to the gate. And there's all these people crowded around this dude who's like sitting on the ground over there. And I was like, oh, that looks like a medical emergency. Having worked in emergency medicine for, you know, an extended period of time, I'm familiar with what an emergency looks like. Working on an ambulance for, you know, a decade, and being in the military and whatnot. So I hear one of the nice ladies at the counter that was checking on this guy say, okay, so we've called the paramedics. They're on their way, and they'll be here in a minute. And like, kind of the crowd dispersed a little bit at that point. I walked over and sat down next to this guy and was like, hey man, what's going on? Just struck up a conversation with this guy who he believed he was having a stroke. And I started just asking him, you know, doing my thing, asking all the medical questions, figuring out what's going on or whatever. And I don't know, man. I don't know what it means to be medically intuitive or any of that sort of stuff, but I put my hand on this guy's wrist to check his pulse while I'm talking to him. And I had in my head a flash of an EKG strip of atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response, which is not a common thing that you would like have pop up or whatever. Like, it, you know, it happens to people, but you know, I was like, AFib with RVR. Okay. What? I don't know what that means. Right. So I'm asking him all these questions. He thinks he's having a stroke because he'd had a transient ischemic attack just before that. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm asking all these history questions. He had super complex medical histories on like a fistful of meds 3 times a day for a whole bunch of different stuff. You know, this is a very chronically ill person. Right. Paramedic shows up. And he's a young, super green paramedic. And I was like, hey, man, you know, like everybody's chasing stroke. And I'm like, I really don't think this guy's having a stroke. I think he's got, you know, an arrhythmia, and it might put him at risk for a stroke, but I don't think that's what's happening right now. Right. It's just humor me. Like they wanted to put him on some meds and take him to the emergency room. I was like, humor me, put a monitor on him and just see what his heart is doing. AFib with RVR, man. Like, they put the thing on him, and it was the exact like EKG reading that I had like flash into my head from. You're not going to get that from somebody's pulse. You're just going to get like, this is irregular or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then even like, so then I looked it up. I'm not like some kind of medical genius. I pulled up on my phone and I have an app that says like, hey, the UpToDate app is a really good app for like, you know, clinicians. I have a subscription to it. So I was like, hey, like the, you know, the paramedic, the kid was like, oh, okay, well, if he's got that, I'm just going to do this to treat it or whatever. And I was like, no, hold on a second. Like the med that you're going to give him interacts with this other med that he's taken for this other thing that he's got.
Wow.
And that would have bottomed out his pressure and he would have died right there if this kid would have given him the med that he had planned on giving him. I talked him into like, no, don't give him that med. Like just take him to the hospital. Like just take him to the hospital and figure it out whenever you get there instead of that or whatever. So now whatever that guy's name is, he gets to be with his wife a little bit longer than if like my flight had been the next day, right? Because the people who were going to show up there probably were going to kind of goof things up. And, you know, like the third leading cause of death in America right now is medical errors. So we managed to dodge that bullet. And I don't know how to make sense of that, man. Nothing like that's ever happened to me in my life before then. Nothing like that's ever happened since or whatever. But like a lot of weird little things like that have been happening to me ever since my 42nd birthday. And I don't know what to do with any of that.
Maybe things like that have happened to you. You just haven't been aware of them.
And that's something that a good friend of mine suggested is like, yeah, maybe you've just been like so heads down focused on yourself. There were tons of opportunities to do those exact things all the way along. And now you're just in a place where you're actually like looking out for your fellow man in a way that makes those opportunities available. Like it just was, you wouldn't have seen that guy before. And now you're the kind of person that sees people who need help in a different way. Right. Instead of like, oh, it's a burden. Oh, look at this mess over here. I got to work my way around. It's, oh, hey, what's going on with that dude? Why don't I just see what's going on? Right. So now he's okay. He went on his way. I had a salad and I still caught my flight. So everything worked out okay in the end.
Maybe this speaks to the idea of friendship that you were talking about earlier. Like maybe this is how things get better when we don't have our heads down, but we're looking for the opportunities to make the lives of those around us better. Like what happens in that world?
Yeah, that's how I've described it to, I get a lot of soldiers asking me about, you know, psychedelics for PTSD and that sort of thing. Right. And there's a lot of concern like, hey, if like active duty troops start doing psychedelics, are they all going to like lay down their arms and refuse to be soldiers and all of that sort of stuff? I'm not real concerned about that. I don't think that's a thing. I think, you know, warriors are warriors all the way through. I think what happens is for a lot of my life, there was this hypervigilance and hyper arousal where I was always looking at everybody's hands to see if they had a weapon. Right. And I still feel like I'm wired up that way in a bunch of ways, but I'm not afraid. Like it was all kind of fear and anger. And like, okay, like I'm sitting in church, concealed carry and watching for an active shooter. Like the likelihood of that's pretty low statistically. It happens sometimes, but I'm like hoping for it, right? Like, all right, yeah, today's the day. Today's the day there's an active shooter in church and I'm going to be a hero or whatever, right? Like that's how messed up you can get in the head around some of that stuff from time to time or whatever, right? Now it's more like just as aware, just as, you know, hyper vigilant, but I'm looking at people's hands to see like, are they empty and do they need something? Like, is there enough in that person's bowl over there? Not, are they a threat to me or anything like that? Because I think like that, you know, the threat response stuff, like I said before, fear, flight, your freeze, fight, flight is hardwired into us, right? You can kind of trust your nervous system to do the right thing in an emergency as much as your training has allowed that to be possible, right? You don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. But outside of those rare situations, like I can still feel the switch just gets flipped from fear and anger to love and compassion, but it's the same level of awareness. It's the same watching the horizon, watching the room, looking for everybody. And it's like, hey, that old lady needs some help with her groceries across the parking lot there. I'm a strapping young man. I'll go take care of some groceries for her or whatever, right? Like, you know, it's the exact same thing. Like, you know, nothing's changed on the outside and everything's changed in how I'm perceiving myself so that I wind up showing up differently to everybody, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's profound lessons in there too. I've found that whenever I take the time to listen and help somebody else, I become the student in some way because I start thinking like, oh yeah, I do that. Oh, you know what? Like I always do this one thing that's kind of like that. So in helping other people, for me, I always get pretty introspective on it later and be like, I wonder what they were thinking, like why they did that. And then I'll come up with a nugget of why I would do that. And I'd be like, oh, maybe, you know.
Yeah, it's just projecting. Everything
Yeah,
is a projection. I'm a projector. I'm just walking through life projecting.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I were them, I would be a moron to do something like that. Therefore, they must be a moron. And then, sure enough, they had a really good reason for what they were
Right.
doing. And
Right.
turns out they knew more than you did, and now they're a Bitcoin millionaire, and I'm still working a 9 to 5 or whatever. Right? This early adopters of Facebook are all retired. What is this Facebook? Is it like a yearbook full of faces?
Right.
I don't understand. Yeah.
It's interesting. In your book too, I remember there was one chapter where you spoke about a friend that you knew in high school. They were good friends, and then something happened to him, and without even blinking an eye, you're like, I'm gonna support this person. Like, I think maybe you could speak to the idea of your ideas about worth and money and giving and how that all plays a part, because I think it's kind of connected to the awareness of helping people on some level.
Yeah, I may not be the best person to comment on any of this sort of stuff because I'm not a rich man by any stretch of the imagination. But
Here.
I like anytime that I get I'm awful at this, man. Like when my wife and I first got married, I remember it was like Christmas time. I was like 25. We had our first apartment. I got like my first credit card, and we got one of those like World Vision catalogs in the mail, and they were asking for donations for little girls who had been trafficked. They were going to get them hygiene kits. It was like hairbrushes for these little girls, and I was like, holy shit, I have to buy $5,000 worth of these like hygiene kits for these little girls. Like my heart broke, and I was like, well, I've got access to $5,000. Why wouldn't I give $5,000 to this? Like that was the level of impulsive money decision making in my 20s or whatever. It was like, I got a good job. I can pay off $5,000 in, a couple months, but these little girls are suffering right now. Here, I'll just max out this credit card. It's not like I didn't talk to my wife or whatever, like she's like the best. She's the most loving person. She's like, you're an idiot, but I'm in or whatever, like, okay, sure. Merry Christmas to all these little girls. Now they have hairbrushes or whatever. Right. That's the heart that I just can't escape from, is trying to be that good to everyone around me. And it's made me go broke multiple times along the way. Right. To where like, okay, yes, their lives are better. Yes, but also now I got to hustle if my kids are going to have a roof over their head or whatever. And being a lot more strategic about some of that sort of stuff has been an important lesson for me to learn, like to get mentors who are steps ahead of me on all of those sorts of things and figure out like, yeah, actually, like there's a cycle to this. It's predictable. You can make financial projections. They're not imaginary or whatever. Like they are and they aren't. Like I'll argue with them. I'll be like, yeah, this is imaginary, but I sure hope it comes true or whatever. Right. But I think the issue is treating money as an end in itself is always a dead end. Like that, if it's just the accumulation of this thing, whatever this thing is outside of me, that's a mistake. But if you see it as a conduit, if you see it as a way of conveying what worth is, if you see it as a means to an end, what are the ends that you want? The ends that I want are, to set my kids up for success in a way that I wasn't set up for. And once that is made possible, I just want to be as generous as imaginable with everything else that I see around me. Right. And there's plenty of, worthwhile endeavors in that regard, but I also want them to be the sorts of things that I can watch. That like I want to be, what do they call it, doing things locally that have a global impact. Like there's plenty of good nonprofits in Kentucky to give to where I could kind of see what the outcomes are there. And there's some groups here that I've been researching a little bit to figure out like, okay, once my kids are set up for success, how can I help those organizations to do the work that they're doing with, again, some of the things that are nearest and dearest to my heart are, mental health related, especially around trying to end suicide. My friend, Wiz Buckley has the No Fallen Heroes Foundation, where they want to take, the 22 to 44 veterans that the statistics suggest die by suicide every day, and we want to take that number to 0. That's an organization worth investing time and money in. There's an organization here in Kentucky called Slaves No More that are working to try to prevent and combat human trafficking on both the front end and the back end. Like, it's not well known, but because of the way the interstates are laid out in the Midwest, Kentucky and Ohio are really big states for people being trafficked through here to the Northeast and down to the Southeast. And if you're going to stay moving, you got to come through here. So there's a ton of problems around some of that stuff that I'd like to do something about. So with the way, like, I see dollar signs and I immediately think of the needs that those dollar signs could meet in the people that I've met and interacted with, the people like my friend that I describe in my book who, died of a fentanyl overdose, the people who I've served with and who've suffered in ways that, I know acutely the same sort of suffering. And then just like, more than anything in the world, man, I want Earth to be a safe place to be a kid for like the first time in history, right? Like, to the degree that I could make something like that possible, even like in my county, like, I feel like that would be worth bleeding and sweating and crying for, like, I'd do whatever I could. We could kick in some doors and beat the brakes off some pimps and rescue some people, and we could do some psychedelic assisted therapy on the back end for everybody that gets rescued or whatever, right? And then, just come spend some time on the farm and let your nervous system be a little less nervous and go back out into the world and do good and beautiful things, being who you are. That's what I'd like to see happen for myself, the people in every concentric circle around me as I reach out in whatever network I get to participate in. That's not really answering your question about money very well, because I'm not an economist or anything, but I'm trying.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I think that community is the one thing that's going to make us better. And it just seems like there's so much division lately. Here's a question. Like, when you look at, I was never in the military, and I don't know a whole lot about strategy, but it seems to me that division is the way in which people are manipulated. And it seems like there's so much division in our country right now. I can't help but like think that if there was just some way for us to see ourselves as Americans, or just see ourselves as neighbors, like that would go a long way, instead of blaming someone else that you don't even know for some silly reason. Like, what's your take on all this division? Is this something that is just economically viable? Is it something that is a way in which to keep people distracted from solving bigger problems? Or is it just, what's your take on this division that we see?
I think we live in a simulation that's the simulator is tired of us not recognizing that it's a simulation, and that it's turning up the volume on all of these divisions so that it's just so loud and so obvious that it's like, wake the fuck up. Do you really think this stuff matters? Right? Like,
Thank you.
Like what's I don't know, what's a good example? Like, so I have people who come in, like, who are struggling in my practice, or just friends that I'm talking to in general, right? And like, they're just fixated on either they just absolutely hate Joe Biden or absolutely hate Donald Trump, but they sound exactly alike. If I could remove the name of who they're referring to, and if you just made these two people sit down and talk about what they hate the most in the world, but neither of them was allowed to say the name of who they were talking about, it would sound like an echo chamber between them. And if you let them talk for an hour and they thought that they were both talking about the same person, they would be the best friends in the universe. Oh yeah, this guy sees the way the world is. Like, he just gets it. Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Complete narcissist. He's just the worst. Absolutely. Blah 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 blah. Wait a minute. Are you talking about Joe Biden? No, I'm talking about Donald Trump. Oh, you piece of shit. Oh, this is how could you be this wrong about everything? Like, does it really? What is the impact on you being who you are right here, right now, other than that you're paying attention to that stuff around the clock? So now you're angry and irritable and nobody wants to be around you, and you start to resemble what you're describing in Washington all of the time, right? Like, your wife and your kids want nothing to do with you because all you do is ramble on about this nonsense in DC that really the ripple effects on your day-to-day life are relatively small. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like DC
Right.
doesn't matter or like laws don't matter or any of that sort of stuff, but the amount that it matters compared with the amount that people get hung up on it is staggering to me, right? So
Yeah.
like the divisions are stuff that I think are as artificial as anything could get. Like they only exist inside of your head. Yeah.
Right.
And as soon as you decided to put those things down, you could figure out how similar and how different somebody actually is by getting to know them rather than the large wall of opinions between you and them that's preventing you from getting into actual human contact with someone else, right? That's a ton of what I'm trying to do with
Yeah.
my podcast, man, is like I do these Q5 episodes where I ask everybody the same 5 questions, and the point is you could listen through the whole thing episode by episode, and now you get to compare notes. Hey, here's the Joint Task Force surgeon for Special Operations Command in Afghanistan answering these questions. Hey, here's a professional podcaster answering these questions. Hey, here's somebody who is of this particular ethnicity or this sexual orientation, or here's somebody famous, or here's somebody you've never heard of. Nobody knows who this person is, right? But here's the same 5 questions, and over and over and over again. I am shocked to find out that we're not that fucking different once you scratch below the surface and you start asking people questions that are really meaningful questions rather than the more meaningless, superficial sorts of stuff. Whether you're like red state or blue state is maybe one of the most superficial things about you, unless you choose to pretend that it's much, much more important to you than that, right? The same thing with religion, right? Like we're talking about religion and politics now. Might as well lean into being as controversial as I can, right? Like the history of religion is us killing each other over not loving the right way. Like there was some enlightened one way back in the day that said, love people. The whole point is to be love and light. And within like a generation, it's like, hey, you're not loving people the right way. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to kill you over this. That's the most loving thing I can do right now is violently disagree with you about the way to love. Like what does that say about us, man? That's like a species, like just, it's okay. It's okay to disagree about the stories if the point is love, if the point is actually taking care of each other, right? If that's what's behind it all, like over and over again, you should be able to reach out across the aisle the way Dan Crenshaw and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez helped to do around MDMA-assisted therapy for active duty soldiers, right?
Right.
With the National Defense Authorization Act in December of last year, right? Like there's hope. There's hope out there if you're looking, for it. You can see hope everywhere. If you're looking for division, you can see division everywhere. What do you want to be? You want to be a divider or a unifier? What's the first principle? What's the first story? What's the first self-deception that you're willing to take on after you go all the way to zero and start all over again? After you deconstruct all the things, you don't just get to hang out there and keep deconstructing everybody else for them. You got to actually go about reconstructing. Oh man, crap. Now I got to actually build something. I got to be somebody. Yeah, you can't escape it. You're going to have a face. And that's the point of like some of the zero thing, right? It's like the zero with 1,000 faces. At least you get to pick the face once you figure it out, right? You get to decide if you want to look like an avocado that fucked an even your avocado. And if you want to be a guy who's, got all more degrees than Fahrenheit, but wears a Deadpool mask around out in public or whatever, you can do that, right? You can be that guy if you want to. And it's actually not that bad.
What's next? Maybe we should talk about, didn't you speak in Kentucky about iboga?
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about that. That sounds fascinating.
They had an event back in November here. So the Kentucky Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission was looking at, they had received upwards of $840+ million from pharmaceutical companies in a settlement around the way in which Kentucky, Virginia, Ohio, West Virginia, we're all kind of, now we know, targeted by several large pharmaceutical companies for setting up these, what are basically pill mills in Eastern Kentucky, right? Eastern Kentucky being coal mining country, right? I deployed with a bunch of people out of Eastern Kentucky. They're some of my favorite people on earth, from out in Barville and that part of the country, right? It's hard living, hardworking, good, salt of the earth people, the sort of people you could call up in the middle of the night if you needed help with something and they'd show up. That's the kind of people that got targeted for, hey, we noticed you got back pain. And boy, do we have a cure for your pain.
Yep.
It's called OxyContin. And don't worry about getting hooked on
Yeah.
that, and it's ruined generations of people's lives out there, right? And there's documentaries about this online now. I think they dramatized it in Dope Sick, and it's a horrible chapter in America's history, right? That happened, and then there's this settlement money that's being allocated to take a look at trying to address the opioid crisis. And a bunch of the money's been allocated to harm reduction, which is great, towards building infrastructure, halfway houses and places for people who are struggling with addiction to have some place to live and to try to establish jobs, and, intensive outpatient programs, and opioid replacement therapies are kind of the best evidence-based medicine at this point, methadone clinics and buprenorphine clinics, and trying to just address reversing the problem that was created here a couple decades ago. And one of the things that the Attorney General's office was looking at allocating was $42 million towards trying to study ibogaine for opioid withdrawal treatment. And, that was always a Hail Mary pass, a moonshot in my mind, because of how far behind MDMA and psilocybin in terms of the available clinical trial data ibogaine is, on the one hand, right? So like MDMA just filed for being rescheduled to a Schedule 2 med late last year, and hopefully before the end of this year, MAPS, now Lycos, will get approval to start doing MDMA-assisted therapy, and that creates a pathway with the data that around psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression coming out of Johns Hopkins and Stanford. There's the hope that will also be running right along on the heels to get not legalized but medicalized, right? It's probably going to be quite a few years worth of clinical trials before ibogaine could get FDA approval, but the idea was to get started. What can we do? We'll plant a seed here. If Kentucky, as a government, says we think this is worth planting a seed, there'd be more money from private investors, from a whole host of different ways of gaining funding to try to run several full-scale clinical trials, right? Clinical trials are extremely expensive. 42 million wouldn't even get us close to there. But the idea is a good one. The issue with ibogaine is that they call it the PhD of psychedelics. It's supposed to be, there's grandmother ayahuasca and there's grandfather ibogaine, and they've got, South America and Africa are looking out for the whole world via these plant spirits or gods or whatever you have. But ibogaine also, if you have any kind of cardiac history, there's a particular way that it binds to what's called a HERK receptor in the heart that can cause arrhythmias much more predictably than any other psychedelic medicine, and even more than most pharmaceuticals, right? So that was the issue, is this, we need to do enough safety studies before we could even get into a clinical trial to make that make sense. Now, do I think that is going to happen eventually? Yeah, I do think that the clinical trials will get done for ibogaine. It seems like the political winds have turned a bit here in Kentucky to where those funds won't be allocated here, but I don't think that that's the end of the ibogaine story by any stretch of the imagination. I do think other states have taken notice, at least, and are willing to kind of pick up the baton there. I think I said in an article I wrote, like, it's not a question of whether or not this medicine's going to get studied. It's whether or not Kentucky will be a leader in that regard or not. And there's nothing wrong with deciding not to be the leaders of studying something that's, that has risks associated with it, right? But I was hopeful that it would happen here just because I live here, and I care about the veterans that live here. I know that this has been ground zero for the opioid crisis, so there's a level of poetic justice about the idea of beginning to be ground zero for healing that, or at least developing some of the science that could make some of that healing possible. Because the available data, the anecdotal stuff and the clinical, or excuse me, the case series level publications around some of that stuff does suggest that even more so than any other psychedelic molecules, plant medicines out there, ibogaine can crush out opioid withdrawal symptoms and alleviate suffering. What winds up being 3 very sketchy months in treatment as usual when somebody's withdrawing from high dose opioid use or abuse can happen in a matter of days, is what all of the reports are around ibogaine's use. What's also interesting, there was a Nature journal article published by Dr. Nolan Williams just last month about stabilizing the cardiac myocardium with doses of magnesium. So there's the potential to be able to make the medicine much safer in a clinical setting for running some of these sorts of clinical trials. But the other thing that they looked at was reversing traumatic brain injury, as well as the kind of the age of the brain, and having played high school football and been in the military and done boxing and mixed martial arts and my wasted youth, I'm super curious about what can ibogaine do for somebody who's banged their head around as much as I have, or whatever. So from like a clinical standpoint, I wish that we would allocate some of those funds here in Kentucky. Just again, I think it's going to get done somewhere. And it would have been nice to watch it happen here in my home state. I don't think that that's going to happen soon, but I'm at a personal level, super curious to know also like how much this medicine is or isn't safe for the general populace. Seems like if you've got a history of cardiac problems in the background, that would rule you out of the clinical trials, but we may be able to make that safe with magnesium. As always, more funding needed, more data needed, more investigation needed around a bunch of that stuff. I was invited to speak on a panel with Talia Eisenberg, who is in her and her husband are involved in running the Beyond Clinic down in Mexico, where they do clinically supervised ibogaine treatments for people. They're on social media. You can look and see the various testimonials on their Instagram. I'm always resharing that because I think they're good people doing good things in the world. And then Cipriana Kwan is a very influential and lady with a very powerful story of recovery from childhood abuse and a lot of difficulty in her life. That was she'll tell her story of how ibogaine healed her, and she was a patient down at the Beyond Clinic. And then Scarlett Mazius from Tactogen was sort of the panel host, and we all just kind of shared our stories of healing. Mine being more, mine not having any direct tie to ibogaine, but more with just being a Kentuckian who could kind of testify to the value that both the the science and the experience of psychedelic assisted therapy that I've benefited from in my own small non-psychonautic way. Right? With losing friends to fentanyl and losing friends to suicide and drunk driving and some of those sorts of things, and just kind of feeling a calling to working in mental health. Got to share a little bit of my story there.
Yeah. I'm glad you did. And I'm so thankful to hear Kentucky being a voice in the room to make things better. Like it's so cool. And I think that they are setting an example just by having that conversation and bringing people around to help the people in their community. I think that they're setting an example for the rest of the states. What about word on the street is there might be a new book coming out soon. Do you want to talk about that?
I like it's I don't know, man. I don't know what to do with anything anymore. Like I just like I wrote the sequel right after writing the first one, but I feel like I need like the sequel won't make any sense to anybody until enough people have read the first one, right? And we talked about this last time. Like I tend to run out ahead of anything that seems reasonable to anybody else. Like, what is that guy doing over there? Why is he doing that, or whatever? Like they project all sorts of things. If I was him, I'd be a moron. What is he doing over there? Like, who publishes a sequel to a book that nobody's read? Right?
A lot of people like said that's some of the best books out there. Like the best ones come back and people find, you know what I mean?
Everybody watches Terminator 2 and then goes back to see what the hell that was about, because that's a way better movie than the first one, right? They'll all be disappointed if they read the second one first. Yeah, I don't know when. I'll just probably wait for Enki and Enlil and Anu to let me know when I should publish the same book or whatever. Yeah, I just feel like I need to kind of something that I felt like I sat down and did some reflection with one of my therapists and some of my friends at the beginning of the year. It was like I need to slow down was the feeling that I had, and the feedback was affirmative from my wife and children and friends and everybody it was like, all right, man, like you wrote a book, started a podcast, opened a clinic, bought a farm, like you did a whole bunch of crazy stuff. How
Right.
about like you planted some seeds? How about you just chill out and
Mm.
water the ones that you already planted and take care of the things that are in front of you and stop like chasing shiny objects, look,
Yeah.
squirrel or whatever, right? And that's where I'm at now, is like when it's time to publish the sequel, if ever, I will know, but that time is not now. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, man. I hear you on the shiny objects. They're pretty.
Yeah, they are. Like I was talking about, there's the farm next to mine is for sale. It's like 110 acres, and I'm like, I could talk somebody into buying that, and then we could make a therapeutic retreat out there or whatever. It's like, with what time? What would you? When would you do anything like that? Right? I don't know.
Right.
But it would be cool, wouldn't it?
There's potential there.
We could put tents up, and people would come stay in them. Who? Right? The people that click like on Facebook and then keep on doom scrolling until
Right.
something. Yeah, exactly. It's fine. The children are fine.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Right. Man, Ben, I love it, man. It's such a fun conversation.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, man. I'm so thankful to have begun a relationship, hanging out with you, call you a friend, and get to touch base all the time. Man, I think you're doing really cool stuff, and it's really fun to watch. And like I said, I think you're probably 5 steps ahead of everybody, man. And I'm super stoked that you're doing it, man. But before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you got coming up? What are you excited about?
Yeah. So if you're looking for mental health care, you can go to advancedpracticeproviders.com. That's my private practice website at this particular juncture. Practicing in Louisville, Kentucky, just doing general psychiatry with the potential for ketamine-assisted therapy where it makes medical sense for people. So if you want, reach out to me there in that official capacity. And then my author page / podcast page / if you want a bullshit t-shirt page is antiheroesjourney.com. If you want a paperback, there's a link there to get it on Amazon. That it's self-published, so it's only available on Amazon. Or if you want the audiobook or ebook, I'm selling those in a bundle direct from the website in both English and Spanish translations, so that 91% of Americans can read the book in their heart language. Or if you can't read and don't want to learn, you can listen to me read it to you and you don't have to pay any extra for that, right? It's the same price as the paperback. So antiheroesjourney.com or advancedpracticeproviders.com. And then you can also, my podcast is up anywhere that you could find podcasts. I'll be making announcements, probably not anytime soon, but if you want to, you can pay attention to me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. Or some of those sorts of places. And I'm just looking to do good things in the world. And whenever that happens, maybe I'll take a picture of it and put it on social media, right?
That's such an awesome thing to do. Ladies and gentlemen, hang on briefly afterwards, Ben. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you to everybody that hung out. Christian, Ben, Kyle, everybody that spent some time hanging out with us today. Truly appreciate it. I hope everybody has a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week. That's all we got. Go to the show notes. Check out the book. Check out Ben. That's all we got. Aloha.